Welcome to Read It. First story is entitled Mother Wants Me to Leave My House Because She Needs to Isolate and Her Daughter Would Just Die Without a Proper TV and Wi-Fi. My cousin is a single mother who lives with her elderly parents. Her daughter, 5, was exposed to someone with COVID and is now starting to show symptoms. My heart goes out for them, but here's the thing. Cousin called me earlier to find out if there's a possibility that I can go stay with my parents for 2 weeks so she can isolate with her daughter in my house. Going to my parents would mean having to put in leave at work. She can afford a guest house, and even if she couldn't, our government actually provides accommodations for cases like this. But no. Apparently, going to such a place would be restrictive to her dearest baby and the child would just die without a proper TV and Wi-Fi. Also, my backyard is nice and big and they would love to use the pool during the hot summer's days. And since my parents are elderly, they could probably use my help for 2 weeks. Believe me, they don't want me there. At this point, I can honestly just frown and shake my head because this woman really expects me to move out of my house and miss 2 weeks of work because her precious child would just die without a TV and Wi-Fi. Next story is, my baby can break all the shit she wants. So I accidentally smashed a glass today, which was annoying, but it made me think of this little gem from like 10 years ago. ESM, entitled Stepmom. Ed, entitled Dad. SS, Stepsister. S, Sister. I just observed, so not really relevant to the story. It was one of the rare times where we'd all just go out and order a pizza or something for dinner, strict anti-junk food policy, and while we were waiting for our order, Sister was running around and being silly, while Stepsister was leaning against a shop window. You know those shops under the building. She'd apply a lot of weight to it and despite Sister repeatedly telling her not to, she'd move back and forth, pushing herself off the window. As you've all guessed, it popped out of the frame, fell to the floor, shattering. 2 ladies ran outside, furious and began scolding Stepsister. For a brief moment I was expecting her to run screaming to her mommy, but she didn't have to. Entitled Stepmother wasn't that far away, and stormed over, angrily telling them to not yell at her daughter. They showed her the damage, and she tried loudly proclaiming they broke it to set her daughter up, and got mad when my sister said she was lying. For someone who had their window smashed, I think the ladies were calmer than most would be. Then came the part where they insisted she pay for the window. She offered like $10, not actual currency but it added to $10. Needless to say, they demanded she pay to replace what her daughter broke. Now my entitled daughter chimed in that it wasn't Stepsister's fault, so they didn't have to pay anything, even though it was her fault. We then got our food, and they left, demanding us to follow, leaving behind 2 very angry ladies. When we got home, entitled Dad scolded both Sister and me for turning on Stepsister and entitled Stepmother, even though I had never said a word, even once, while entitled Stepmother coddled Stepsister telling her she did nothing wrong, and people need to be more understanding. Sorry it wasn't so interesting, but figured it would be a good story. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Thank you so much for the awards and comments. I appreciate it a lot and I am glad you found it an interesting read. I definitely knew I wanted to post it, because while I wasn't sure, I did hope some would find the decade-old story interesting. Edit. Also quickly fixed up the writing by giving Sis a role, as it got confusing she just appeared out of the blue. I apologize for that. Disneyland Paris EM pushes my nephew. For the cast list, I'll use me N2, nephew, 2 years old, EM, entitled Mother K, Kid KS, Kind Stranger. This happened in January 2019. My brother invited me to Disneyland with him, his fiancée, and my 2 nephews. I often go places with them as both of my nephews have special needs and having me there as an extra pair of hands makes things a little less stressful. It's fun for me too because his fiancée is my best friend and has been for 12 years now. The first 2 days go by without any incident. 10-year-old nephew discovers the joy of roller coasters and his parents and I take turns chilling with N2 while the others go on rides that he's too little for. However, on the 3rd day, in Discovery Land, I encounter an awful Karen. Older nephew and his parents have gone to ride Hyperspace Mountain and then Star Tours. It's my turn to watch N2, so I tell them we'll go get a drink and meet them in the stage area near the quick service restaurant. They play Star Wars cartoons on the screens there when no shows are on and I thought it would be nice for N2 to watch while he had a hot chocolate. Don't worry, I let it cool down before transferring it to his no-spill cup. Where this stage area is, there are certain spaces for people with pushchairs or disabilities. I set N2 up with his drink in the space and turned him so he could see the screens, and everything was fine for about half an hour. The first thing I noticed was the sound of a woman telling her child to hurry up and sit down. There were plenty of seats on the benches, but the pushchair/disability areas were full at this point. I turned to see because it sounded like she was right behind me. She was, and I unfortunately made eye contact. I guess this is, somehow, what made her think she could tell me what to do. She smiled at me and, after making sure I spoke English, asked that I move for her and Kay to sit down. This is obviously not verbatim but close as I can remember. Me, oh, sorry but we're not actually going anywhere yet. We're waiting here to meet my brother and the rest of the family. You can wait somewhere else, hun. I need this seat so I can sit with my son. Me, no, I'm sitting here. There are plenty of seats a bit further down. At this point Kay is running up and down the aisle between the benches, waving his bubble wand and yelling. Doesn't seem to notice that other people are now turning to stare. Excuse me? You're supposed to give these seats up for mothers. Me, I'm not going to give you this seat. I'm sat here with my nephew. Please stop asking and just find somewhere to sit. At this point I just ignored her and turned away. The man on the seat next to me gave me a sympathetic look and carried on watching the cartoon with his own children. I get my phone out and text my brother to ask him to text me when he gets off the rides so I can go meet them. The next thing I hear is N2 screaming. I immediately look up to see EM pushing her way into the space, and by doing so she was shoving N2's legs roughly to the side. I stand up and pull his pushchair aside, with myself standing in front of the seat now, so she can't shove his legs anymore, and yell at her. Me, what the hell do you think you're doing? Sitting down, you need to move and let me have this seat. She tried pushing again to get to the seat, and I put my hand out to make sure she couldn't touch my nephew, so she ended up pushing against my arm instead. So of course she takes this to mean that I hit her, and she starts yelling. How dare you hit me? I could have you arrested for that. Move now or I'll go to security and tell them how you've attacked me. Me, I did not hit you. You shoved me. If you want to play this game then sure, we can both walk to security together now and we'll ask them to check the security cameras. At this point I was absolutely raging, but I was forcing myself to stay calm since I didn't want to upset N2 any more than he already was. I used to be quite combative in my teens and early 20s but I've been trying to make sure my nephews never have to see me like that, so I was really trying to not end up in a screaming match. Then the kind stranger spoke up in a thick Newcastle accent. He swore a lot more than I'm writing here. "KS, miss, you need to leave this lady and her kid alone. You started this whole thing, now piss off and sort yourself out. I'll tell security myself if you want to carry on pissing about." This is ridiculous. I didn't come here to be attacked and shouted at. "Kay, come on, we're going to find your dad and we'll get this sorted out." She then stormed out with Kay following her. KS shrugged at me, called her a daft cow and we chatted for a few minutes about the situation while I checked N2's legs. Luckily he seemed fine. 10 minutes later the rest of my family came in from the ride and I told them the story. I've never seen my brother so mad, and we sat there for a while as he and his fiancée cuddled their son and fussed him a little. Didn't show back up while we were there and we decided to just get back to having fun. I bought both nephews a waffle to cheer up and we carried on with our holiday. We didn't see EM or her family after that. N2 was fine, nothing but a little bruising on one leg. We discussed whether we wanted to find security ourselves or not and decided against it in the end. With the boys being special needs we didn't want to stress either of them out so decided to just carry on having a fun holiday. Next story, EM demands my friend to clean the swing at the public park because her baby will get sick. So I just came back from the park. Cast, me, EM, friend 1 to 3, SK, silent kid. Story, so my school had a very important meeting students have to attend, so meeting ended and I came home to ask my parents if I can go to the park with my friends and they told me I can. When I came back I saw my friends devastated. They told me a woman, EM from now on, was yelling in my friend's face. Me, hey, what happened? It turns out my friends were playing on a swing like any kid at young teenage age would and then came EM. EM, get off that swing and clean it. F2, what do you think you are doing? Why are you yelling? EM, how dare you speak like that to me? Get off that, swing, now. You want my child to get sick. F1, okay, chill out, no need to yell. EM, here is what's going to happen, you will clean this right now or I'm calling your parents and police. Then F3 proceeds to start cleaning. EM, yes, was it that hard to listen to your elder? Come here SK. And then I came. The fact that this EM was yelling in my friends' faces during a pandemic makes me think a brick fell on her head. And last story is the best, so please remember to like and subscribe, and would you touch some maggots? My friend's EM made me touch maggots when I was 14. All of these amazing entitled parents posts reminded me of a story from my teens. Characters, me, my mom, my friend, Jess, and Jess's mom, M. When I was 14, I went on holiday with my friend Jess and our mums. The place we stayed at was on the coast, and in the cottage there were some crab nets. Jess and I spent a day crab fishing. We were using raw bacon in the nets, and when we returned to the cottage we put the nets on the porch in the sunshine and forgot about them. A few days later, while my mum was out, we discovered the forgotten nets. After a few days of raw bacon sitting in the sunshine, they'd begun rotting, and there were small insects, I think maggots, crawling all over them. EM went ballistic, shouting at me only for leaving the nets there and letting them get into such a state when they didn't belong to us. I tried to say that it was both me and Jess who had left them, but she kept shouting. She then demanded that I take the rotting bacon out of the nets, and as a not-so-assertive teenager being shouted at by someone else's mother, I complied. Unfortunately, the nets were tied really tight at the top, so to pull the rotting bacon out I had to squeeze my fingers in and try and grip pieces, all the while insects are crawling out and onto my hands. I was thoroughly disgusted and trying not to throw up. At one point I turned to Jess and said, "Hey, this is going to take a while, can you help me?" desperate for some assistance and an end to my suffering. EM immediately said, "No, she's fine, thank you, keep going." It finally ended when my mum came back and saw what I was doing. She was completely horrified and demanded I stop immediately, asking why on earth I was touching rotting meat. I told her EM had made me do it. My mum sent me to wash my hands, and I later discovered my mum lost her shit with EM, who, as it turns out, was much more confident when bullying someone else's kid than she was when another adult challenged her. My mum told her the nets could have been replaced for a few quid and to never force her kid to do shit like that again. TLDR, EM made me touch rotting meat. My mum is awesome.